You're under arrest.
For drinking coffee? That badge says FBI! Big mistake, officer.
You know what, sweetheart, I've been doing this job for 9 years, and I have never once seen a black woman sitting alone in this neighborhood at 8 in the morning in a blazer like that, without a very good reason to be nervous. He said it loud enough for the whole cafe to hear. Then he reached into her jacket, pulled out her badge. Wallet looked at it for exactly 3 seconds and dropped it into the puddle of spilled coffee on the counter, like it was a receipt he didn't want touching his fingers. Nice prop. Where'd you order it? Amazon 5-star reviews. A few people looked away. Nobody said anything. He wasn't finished. He leaned down until his face was level with hers and said quietly enough to feel like a threat. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stand up, put your hands behind your back, and stop embarrassing yourself. Because whatever story you've got prepared, nobody in this room is going to believe it over me. She did not move. She did not raise her voice. She looked at the security camera above the chalkboard menu and said nothing. Then, as he snapped the first cuff onto her wrist in front of a cafe full of witnesses, she looked directly into that lens one more time. Like she had been waiting for exactly this moment her entire career. What Officer Kyle Brandt did not know what would cost him everything 61 days later in a federal courtroom was that the small silver pin on the lapel of her blazer had been recording since 7:41 that morning. Every word, every sneer, crystal clear, encrypted, intact. Stay with this one. You will want to see exactly how it ends. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. Right now, we want to know where in the world you're watching this. And if this channel isn't already on your screen every week, this story is exactly why it should be. Hey everyone, every week I find one story from somewhere in America that stopped me cold. Tonight, it's this one. What's up everyone? I travel this country looking for the moments that remind us who we really are. Pull up a chair. There are people who walk into a room and immediately change its temperature, not because they are loud, not because they demand attention, but because something in the way they carry themselves, the set of the shoulders, the quality of the stillness, the eyes that move across a space and miss nothing, communicates something that cannot be faked and cannot be taught. It is the product of years, decades, of rooms that tried to break them and didn't. Special Agent Renee Caldwell was that kind of person. At 48 years old, she was the Deputy Assistant Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Civil Rights Division, one of only 7 people in the country who held that title, and the only black woman among them. She had not arrived at that position through connections or circumstance. She had arrived there the way she arrived at everything methodically, precisely. And at a cost, she had paid herself in full without asking anyone to share the bill. Her record spoke in numbers that did not require commentary. In 2019, she led the 18-month undercover operation that dismantled a police corruption ring in Detroit. 14 officers, 2 supervisors, and a deputy commissioner, all indicted on the same Tuesday morning before any of them had the chance to coordinate a story. In 2021, she coordinated the prosecution of a sitting county judge in Savannah who had been accepting bribes from a private prison contractor for 6 years. The judge had believed until the morning of his arrest that he was untouchable. He had been wrong about that in the specific irreversible way that people are wrong when Renee Caldwell has spent a year building a case against them. She had testified 4 times before the Senate Judiciary Committee, twice under questioning that had been specifically engineered to rattle her, to make her contradict herself, to make her angry, and she had not given them a single word they could use. Not once. Not ever. She was by any reasonable measure one of the most accomplished federal law enforcement officers in the country. On the morning of October 14th, What she wanted with an urgency that was almost ordinary given the weight of her usual concerns was a decent cup of coffee and 20 minutes of quiet before a breakfast meeting. She pulled her black government-issue Tahoe to the curb on Chestnut Street at 7:43 a.m. and cut the engine. Through the windshield, Maplewood, Ohio looked exactly as it always looked, deliberate, manicured, aggressively pleasant. The kind of suburb where the sidewalks were pressure-washed every spring, the flower beds outside the bank rotated with the seasons, and the trees lining the main street had been trimmed to a uniformity that suggested someone had once consulted a diagram. The oaks along Chestnut had just begun their October turn leaves going amber at the edges, and the morning air carried that particular smell, cool and faintly sweet, like something ending with good manners. Renee stepped out. She was tall, natural hair, worn close-cropped, dressed in a charcoal blazer over a white shirt. She moved with the unhurried authority of someone who had nothing left to prove, because she had proved it all already in rooms far more consequential than this one. Before she locked the Tahoe, she did one thing. She reached up and touched the small silver lapel pin on her blazer. An ordinary-looking bar pin, brushed silver, the kind a woman might wear to a professional meeting without anyone looking twice. What it was not was ordinary. It had been standard issue for agents at her level since 2020, manufactured in a Quantico basement workshop by a technical division that did not appear on any organizational chart available to the public. Inside the casing, a microphone array sensitive enough to capture a whispered conversation from across a quiet room, an encrypted storage chip rated to 72 hours of continuous recording, and a transmission buffer that had survived. In controlled field tests, submersion in 30 feet of water and a direct impact from a vehicle side mirror. She pressed the back of the pin once. A faint vibration, barely perceptible, invisible to anyone watching, confirmed it was running. She was not expecting to need it today. Today was a breakfast meeting with U.S. Attorney Monica Shea. A sealed grand jury indictment ready to file. A wire fraud case 18 months in the making, targeting a real estate development company that had been quietly defrauding municipal pension funds across 3 counties. Today was supposed to be a good day. The kind of day that made the 18 months feel worthwhile. She walked toward the Ivory Cup. The cafe occupied the ground floor of a converted brick building between a wine shop and an art gallery, which told you everything you needed to know about Maplewood. The sign above the door was painted in deep green. Through the front window, Edison bulbs glowed warm amber against the gray October sky. Renee pushed open the glass door. The bell above it chimed softly. The interior was exactly the kind of carefully constructed coziness that costs significant money to achieve reclaimed oak floors, exposed brick, a chalkboard menu in deliberately imperfect handwriting. Acoustic music played low enough to seem accidental. At 7:45 on a Tuesday morning, the place was 2/3 full. Women in expensive athleisure, men with noise-canceling headphones and open laptops. A retired couple near the window sharing a pastry in comfortable silence. The ambient hum of conversation didn't stop when Renee walked in. But it stuttered. A half-beat hesitation, involuntary and collective, the way a room adjusts when an unfamiliar variable enters it. The barista, young, dark-skinned name tag reading Aaliyah, looked up. Her smile came a quarter second slower than it had for the customer ahead. A small hesitation, reflexive rather than hostile. Renee cataloged it the way she cataloged everything. Quietly, without reaction, she ordered, black coffee, dark roast, 1 blueberry scone. She took the corner table chosen for sightlines, not comfort, and checked her phone. A message from her supervisor, Assistant Director Calvin Marsh, grand jury indictment sealed. Shea has the filing. Good work, Caldwell. She allowed herself one sip of satisfaction. Then she set the phone face down and picked up her coffee. Outside, and through the front window, a Maplewood PD cruiser turned slowly onto Chestnut Street and slowed down. Officer Kyle Brandt had been awake since 5:30 and irritated since 5:31, which was for him a perfectly standard Tuesday. The argument with his wife, Carla, had not been an argument exactly. That was almost worse. She had simply left a note on the kitchen counter, 4 words, no punctuation, written in the handwriting of a woman who had stopped expecting a response and gone back upstairs before he could form a reply. He stood in the kitchen for a minute holding the note, then set it down next to the coffee maker and poured a cup he didn't finish. He was on patrol by 6:15. Kyle Brandt was 39 years old. 9 years with the Maplewood Police Department, thick through the neck and shoulders in the way of a man who had been powerful once and was determined to preserve the physical memory of it. He had been a linebacker at Dayton, not Division I, but close enough that the distinction had never felt important to him. That fact remained the organizing principle of his self-understanding, which is a dangerous thing to be when the fact in question is 15 years in the past, and the body has begun the slow, quiet work of forgetting what it used to be able to do. He understood the world in terms of territory and belonging. Who was in their right place? Who was not? It was a map he had drawn early, had never revised, and had never been seriously required to defend because in Maplewood, almost everyone who appeared on it fell exactly where he expected them to. His personnel file told a story he had never read in full. 14 excessive force complaints in 9 years. 11 involved Black or Latino civilians. All 14 had been reviewed and closed without a sustained finding by Lieutenant Frank Doyle, who had been Brandt's roommate at the Columbus Police Academy, who had stood beside him at his wedding in 2011, and who had in the years since signed his name beneath every single exoneration with the steady, practiced hand of a man who does not allow himself to ask certain questions. Nobody in the Maplewood PD had ever found this arrangement worth examining. Nobody had ever tried. By the time Brandt turned onto Chestnut Street, his patrol had produced 2 parking disputes and a noise complaint from a retired dentist on Birchwood Lane who objected to his neighbor's generator. He had handled all 3 with the mechanical efficiency of a man who has stopped expecting the work to be interesting. He felt on mornings like this one, not like a protector, not like someone whose presence made a neighborhood safer, but like a prop. Seasonal, ornamental, largely unnecessary. He glanced through the front window of the Ivory Cup as his cruiser rolled past. The regulars, the laptop crowd, the yoga crowd, the retired couples who came in for the scones and stayed for the quiet. He knew their cars. He knew which dogs the owner allowed inside on weekday mornings. He knew the rhythms of this block, the way a man knows the rhythms of a place he has appointed himself to watch over. And then he saw her, a woman he did not know. Black, alone at the corner table. Natural hair, professional blazer, the posture of someone entirely at ease in her own body. She was looking out the window at the street with a quality of stillness that registered to Brandt not as composure, not as the ordinary calm of a woman having coffee before a meeting, but as something that required explanation. The reaction was not a thought. It happened below the level of reasoning in the part of the brain that pattern matches before the conscious mind has a chance to weigh in. Doesn't belong. Waiting for something. Casing it. The blazer registered not as evidence of legitimacy, but as a contradiction. Wealth on a black woman alone in this neighborhood. On a weekday morning in Brandt's private taxonomy, this combination did not read as ordinary. It read as something that needed accounting for. He did not run the plates on the black Tahoe at the curb. That would have taken 45 seconds and produced a result he was not prepared to process. He did not call it in. He did not wait for an infraction, a signal, a reason. He parked. He adjusted his belt. He was at the door of the Ivory Cup before he had fully formed a conscious plan, and his hand was resting on his baton before he had taken 3 steps inside. The cafe went quiet, not silent. The espresso machine completed its cycle. The music kept playing at its low, careful volume, but the conversation dropped 2 full registers and the room's attention shifted. Invisible. Unanimous. Every person in the Ivory Cup tracking the officer moving through the tables without being seen to look. Aaliyah behind the counter set down the cup she was holding. Both palms went flat on the cold surface. She did not move. The retired schoolteacher at the table nearest the window. Eleanor Voss, 71 years old, 32 years in the Maplewood School District, stopped mid-sentence and looked up. She watched Brant's trajectory across the floor, and her face arranged itself into an expression that people who have spent their lives in classrooms recognize immediately. The expression of someone who sees exactly what is about to happen and knows with a specific and exhausting certainty that they have seen it before. A teenage boy at the counter there with his mother waiting on a hot chocolate looked from Brant to Renee to the badge wallet visible in the inside pocket of her blazer and back again. Brant stopped at her table. His shadow fell across her phone screen. Renee waited 3 seconds. Then she set the phone face down. She looked up. Completely neutral, not hostile, not apologetic, not afraid, present and paying attention and giving him absolutely nothing he had not earned. "Can I help you, officer?" she said. Brant stood over her table with his thumbs hooked in his vest, using his bulk the way he always used it as an opening argument, as a physical statement that preceded anything he might actually say. "You live in this area." Renee looked at him steadily. "I don't see how that's relevant. I'm a paying customer having breakfast." "I didn't ask if you were a customer. I asked if you live here. And I told you it isn't relevant." Her voice was entirely even. No heat. No apology. The tone of a woman who has answered questions like this before and has long since stopped performing deference she does not feel. Brant shifted his weight, tried a different angle, the standard one, the one that had worked 100 times in 9 years without requiring much thought. "We've had some calls. Reports of someone matching your description sitting in businesses for extended periods, making other customers uncomfortable." Renee let the sentence finish. She let a moment breathe, then matching my description. She said it quietly. The words landed with the precision of something dropped from a considerable height. A black woman in a blazer, eating a scone. At 8 in the morning. At the table to Renee's left, Eleanor Voss pressed her lips together hard. The sound she suppressed was brief and involuntary, the sound of a woman who has spent a lifetime teaching children that certain things are wrong and who is watching one of those things happen in front of her in a cafe on a Tuesday. Brant's face flooded dark from the collar upward. The embarrassment arrived first, and then hardened with a speed that had become reflex over 9 years into something more dangerous. "Stand up." Renee did not stand. She leaned back slightly and interlaced her fingers on the table, calm, deliberate, unhurried, and looked at him with the patient attention of a woman who has sat across from far more formidable men than this one, and has never once needed volume to hold her ground. "Officer." Her voice dropped half a register. Measured, precise. "I am waiting for a scheduled meeting. I have not committed any crime. I have not violated any law. Unless you can articulate a specific, reasonable suspicion that I am involved in criminal activity, I am going to finish my coffee." It was Brant would later claim the composure that infuriated him most. Not defiance he knew how to handle. It was the complete absence of fear, the total refusal to perform the anxiety he expected. It violated something in the architecture of how he understood these encounters to work, and the violation landed like an insult. He had been challenged, in front of an audience. That ended one way. I said, "Stand up." His hand dropped from his vest to the baton at his belt. Aaliyah behind the counter picked up her phone. She set it on the lower shelf, angled toward the floor. The small, deliberate movement of a 23-year-old woman who has seen this before and knows, without being told, exactly what to do. The teenage boy at the counter had gone completely still. "ID now." Brant's hand closed on Renee's arm. "Officer," her voice had not changed. Not in volume, not in pace. But something had shifted in it, a quality of absolute precision, the voice of a person who chooses every word, the way a surgeon chooses an instrument. "In the inside pocket of my blazer is a credential wallet. Before you go any further with this, before you make the next decision, I strongly suggest you look at what is inside it." Brant reached in. His fingers found the leather immediately. Not a billfold, thicker, stiffer, conditioned in the specific way of something that has been handled every day for years. He pulled it out, flipped it open. The gold shield caught the light from the Edison bulbs above and threw it back hard. The spread-winged eagle of the Department of Justice seal engraved with a depth and precision that no novelty supplier had ever achieved. Below it, in raised blue enamel letters pressed into heavy metal, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Renee Caldwell, Deputy Assistant Director. Brant stared at it. His brain ran the image once, ran it again, produced the same output both times. Fake. Has to be fake. He looked at the badge. He looked at the woman. He looked at the badge again. And then something shifted in him, not recognition, not comprehension, but the panicked momentum of a man who has already started down a road and cannot afford to admit the road was wrong. He held the badge wallet up by 2 fingers, over the counter, over the puddle of spilled coffee spreading slowly across the white surface. And he dropped it. It landed with a flat, wet sound that carried across the entire cafe. "You know what, sweetheart, I've been doing this job for 9 years, and I have never once seen a black woman sitting alone in this neighborhood at 8 in the morning in a blazer like that without a very good reason to be nervous." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, "Nice prop. Where'd you order it, Amazon? 5-star reviews." Eleanor Voss stood up halfway from her chair. "Officer, that looked real. Sit down, ma'am." He leaned in close enough that his voice dropped to something that was meant to feel private but was loud enough for 3 tables to hear. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put your hands behind your back and stop embarrassing yourself in front of these people. Because whatever story you've got, nobody in this room is going to believe it over me." Renee looked at the security camera above the chalkboard menu. She held it for exactly 2 seconds, then she looked back at Brant and said with the quiet finality of a woman who has already made every decision that matters, "All right, officer, if that's how you want to do this." The first cuff snapped onto her left wrist with a sound like a lock engaging. And from across the cafe, Aaliyah watched, phone still running, hands still flat on the counter as the door swung open, and a tall black woman in a charcoal blazer was walked out onto Chestnut Street in handcuffs. Nobody in the ivory cup moved. Nobody said a word. But 3 phones were already recording, and 1 lapel pin had not stopped. The October air hit cold the moment Renee stepped through the door. It smelled of wet leaves and exhaust and the particular sharpness of a morning that had not yet decided what kind of day it intended to be. Brant had one hand on her arm and was moving fast, the walk of a man who wants to get his arrest to the car before anyone can ask him a question he doesn't have an answer to. The hood of the cruiser was cold through the charcoal fabric of Renee's blazer. Brandt was patting her down with rough, imprecise hands when the gray Audi turned the corner onto Chestnut Street. It was moving faster than the residential limit allowed. It parked at an angle behind the cruiser close enough that the front bumper almost touched, and the door opened before the engine had fully stopped. Monica Shea was 52 years old, 5'3", and possessed of a temper she had spent 2 decades learning to deploy strategically rather than reflexively. She was the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Ohio, and she had prosecuted 84 federal cases without losing a night of sleep over a single one of them. She lost the strategic deployment in approximately 4 seconds. She took in the scene, the handcuffs, the position, the badge wallet sitting in a puddle of coffee, visible through the cafe window, and she was already moving before she had finished processing it. Officer. Her credentials were outheld 4 inches from Brandt's face. I am Monica Shea. I am the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Ohio. The woman whose face is on your hood is the Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. We had a meeting scheduled in that cafe 11 minutes ago. She looked at Renee. Renee, tell me you're all right. I'm fine, Monica. Her voice was entirely composed. Don't uncuff me. Monica blinked. Excuse me. Don't uncuff me. We're going to the station. I want every second of this on official record. Every form, every log entry, every camera. She looked at Brandt with the patient, unhurried attention of a woman who has already decided how this ends. Officer, I believe you were taking me somewhere. Brandt had the handcuff key half drawn from his ring. He stood frozen, key extended, no clear instruction available from any direction. His confidence had been a wall 40 minutes ago. It was now developing structural problems that he could feel but could not yet name. Then the black Tahoes turned the corner, 3 of them, simultaneously. Government plates, no markings, moving with the unhurried coordination of vehicles driven by people who have nowhere urgent to be because they have already arrived. They parked in a loose arc around the cruiser, sealing the exits without ceremony, without drama, without anyone raising their voice. 6 agents stepped out in dark suits. No tactical gear, no weapons drawn. They took up positions with the calm efficiency of people who are very good at their jobs and who are at this particular moment personally offended on behalf of someone they respect. Agent Tara Voss, tall, close-cropped hair, the face of a woman who has made arrests on 3 continents and does not require an audience to feel authoritative, walked directly to Brandt. Officer. Her voice had the texture of something that does not bend. I believe you have my director in handcuffs. I'm going to ask you to step away from her. Brandt stepped back. Both hands rose to chest height, the involuntary physics of a man who has just understood where he is standing and doesn't like the answer. Renee straightened from the hood of the cruiser. She rotated her shoulders, once adjusted her blazer, as well as the cuffs permitted, and looked at Monica. I'd ride with Agent Voss, she said. I'll ride with Officer Brandt. We're going to the station to complete this arrest, and I want his report written before he has a chance to make a single phone call. She looked at Brandt. Officer, I believe you were taking me somewhere. The back seat of Brandt's cruiser smelled of industrial disinfectant, and something underneath it, older, darker. The accumulated residue of fear and surrender that no cleaning product ever fully erases. The vinyl was cracked along the center seam. The plexiglass divider between the seats was scratched and slightly yellowed, softening everything on the other side into shapes. Renee sat with her back straight and her feet flat on the floor. The cuffs bit into her wrists at a specific angle, she noted, and filed away. She was not thinking about the discomfort. She was thinking about Maya, 16 years old, dark-skinned like her mother. drives through suburbs like Maplewood 3 times a week for debate practice, passes patrol cars like this one. Renee had sat with her the night she got her learner's permit and had the conversation the one no mother should have to give, and that no mother in a particular demographic gets to skip. She had explained it carefully. Maya had listened carefully. At the end, Maya had said, "Mom, I already know," in the voice of a girl who had figured it out years ago and was only being told it officially. Renee held that for exactly as long as it served her. Then she put it where it needed to go. She pressed the back of her lapel pin once. A faint vibration, imperceptible to anyone watching, confirmed the file was intact and saving. In the front seat, Brant's eyes went to the rearview mirror every 30 seconds, not watching his prisoner. Watching the convoy, 3 black Tahoes locked onto his tail, matching every turn at a distance of exactly 2 car lengths, unhurried, patient, somehow worse than aggression. "You're quiet back there," he said. His voice had thinned since the cafe. Renee said nothing. "Listen." Lower now, the swagger almost entirely gone. "If there's been some kind of mix-up, if you want to explain the ID situation before we get inside, maybe we can handle this without Officer Brant." She did not turn her head. "You are under the impression that this is a negotiation. It is not. Everything you say to me from this moment forward is evidence. I would recommend silence." Brant hit the steering wheel with his palm. A hollow, unsatisfying sound. They turned into the station lot. The Tahoes sealed the exits behind them. Renee looked out the scratched window at the concrete face of the building and thought about nothing in particular. The way a woman thinks about nothing when every decision that matters has already been made. The booking area of the Maplewood Police Department smelled of burnt coffee and institutional soap, and something papery and faintly stale, the accumulated atmosphere of a room where bad days are processed into paperwork and filed away. Fluorescent tubes gave everything a quality of light that was technically adequate and aesthetically bleak. Sergeant Lou Perkins had been at that desk for 29 years. He had seen most things. He had developed over those decades a very specific instinct, something he could not have explained in any formal report, for the difference between a person who has been brought in and a person who has chosen to walk through the door. He looked up when Brant pushed Renee through the entrance. He looked at the blazer, the posture, the quality of stillness in her expression, not the stillness of defeat, not the stillness of fear, but something categorically different. The stillness of a person who is entirely in control of herself and of considerably more than that. 29 years had taught him to read that particular stillness. He set down his coffee mug very carefully. He did not pick it up again. "Hey, Booker Lou," Brant said. His voice had the compressed quality of a man holding something together through effort alone. Resisting obstruction, impersonating a federal officer. Perkins looked at the blazer again. The face, the specific quality of calm. "Travis." He gestured toward the security monitors above his desk. "Look at the screens." Brant looked up. The lobby monitor showed the front entrance in real time. U.S. Attorney Monica Shea at the reception desk, her voice carrying through the audio pickup, at a volume that was pressing the duty receptionist toward the back wall. Behind Monica stood Agent Tara Voss, already on her phone, not explaining, not pleading, just making calls in the quiet, efficient way of someone who knows exactly which numbers to dial and in what order. Through the lobby's glass front, a news van was pulling to the curb on Elm Street. Then a second one behind it. Then a third. "Travis," Perkins said quietly. "Who is this?" Before Brant could answer, Chief Dennis Harlow came through the steel door from the corridor. He was moving fast, which was unusual for a man whose preferred mode of movement communicated that everything was always entirely under his control. He was holding his phone, and whatever conversation he had just ended had done something significant to the color in his face. He looked at Brandt. He looked at Renee. He read the room with the rapid political fluency of a decade in management, the agents visible through the lobby glass, the news vans multiplying at the curb, the U.S. Attorney's voice carrying through 2 sets of walls. Take those cuffs off her. Low. Each word its own complete sentence. Chief, she was resist. The Illinois Attorney General is on hold. The governor's office has called twice. Take them off. Brandt fumbled for his keys. Found them. Dropped them. They hit the linoleum with a sharp clatter and slid 3 feet across the polished floor, coming to rest near Renee's shoe. She looked down at them. She looked back up at Brandt. She did not move her foot. He bent down and retrieved them with hands that were visibly unsteady. The cuffs came off. Renee pressed the back of her lapel pin once the faint confirmation vibration told her the file was intact, still saving 41 minutes of audio preserved on an encrypted chip that neither Brandt nor Harlow nor anyone else in this room knew existed. She rolled her wrists once. She looked at Chief Harlow. "I'll need those cuffs bagged as evidence," she said. "Tagged with the time and Officer Brandt's badge number. Then I don't want coffee, Chief, and I don't want an apology. I want the full booking process on the record, every form, every camera, every log entry as it currently stands, and I want Officer Brandt in the squad room writing his incident report before his union representative answers the phone." Harlow's political smile materialized from muscle memory. Smooth practice no longer connected to anything behind it. "Agent Caldwell, I am deeply sorry. This is clearly a interrogation room, Chief." She turned toward the corridor. "After you." The interrogation room was painted the institutional beige of rooms designed to communicate the absence of comfort. Cinder block walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, one lower than the other. A 2-way mirror everyone in the room understood to be a 2-way mirror. An overhead camera with a steady red light. Renee sat in the suspect's chair. She chose it deliberately. She crossed one leg over the other, settled her hands in her lap, and looked at Harlow with the patient attention of a woman who has nowhere else to be and knows it. Harlow began the apology. It was well constructed. He had given versions of it before. Renee let him finish. Then she placed a single sheet of paper on the table, Brandt's service record pulled from the federal personnel database and printed from her phone during the ride to the station. 14 excessive force complaints in 9 years, 11 involving Black or Latino civilians, 0 sustained findings. Every single exoneration signed by Lieutenant Frank Doyle, who was Officer Brandt's roommate at the Columbus Police Academy and stood beside him at his wedding in 2011. Something moved through Harlow's face. Controlled quickly, suppressed, but visible to someone watching for it. Internal Affairs is an independent. Internal Affairs in this department is 1 lieutenant and 2 part-time administrators. That lieutenant attended the arresting officer's wedding. She paused. How my team in Columbus pulled the full file within 20 minutes of my call from the back of that cruiser. We are thorough, Chief. We have always been thorough. The meeting lasted 14 minutes. When Renee walked out, Harlow closed the interrogation room door behind her. He stood alone for a moment, staring at the surface of the metal table. Then he went and found Brandt. He closed his office door, drew the blinds, turned off his body camera, and opened his computer. "Tell me everything," he said. "All of it. Nothing left out," Brandt told him. Every detail. When he finished, Harlow was quiet for a long time. Then he opened the CAD system using his administrative credentials, the ones that gave him access to every log the department had ever produced. He typed. His fingers were steady. His voice, when he finally spoke, had the flat, determined quality of a man talking himself down a ledge while insisting it is level ground. We need a call in the system before your stop. Probable cause. Something clean. He created a new log entry. Call type suspicious person. Anonymous caller reports black female acting erratically, refusing to leave premises. Possible disturbance. He set the timestamp to 7:58 a.m. 12 minutes before Brandt had ever turned onto Chestnut Street. He hit enter. The entry slotted into the dispatch timeline, sitting between real calls on either side, formatted identically, invisible against the morning's legitimate record. Brandt stared at the screen. "It looks real," he said. "It is real now," Harlow said. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled with a slowness that carried no relief in it whatsoever. When her attorney subpoenas the logs, this is what he finds. A welfare check. You were responding to a concerned citizen. No jury convicts on a welfare check. What neither man knew, what they could not have known, was that Renee's lapel pin was sitting in a clear plastic evidence bag on Lou Perkins's booking counter, 8 feet from the glass partition of Harlow's office wall. The partition was 3/8 of an inch of standard interior glass. The pin's microphone array had been calibrated to capture clean audio through precisely this type of material at distances of up to 20 feet. It had been recording since 7:41 that morning. It was recording Harlow's voice right now. Every word crystal clear, preserved on an encrypted chip that neither man in that office knew existed, and that neither man would know about until it was far, far too late. The footage surfaced within hours. Not one angle. 3. Aaliyah's phone, angled from the counter shelf, had captured the full confrontation from the moment Brandt entered the cafe, his approach, the badge wallet being dropped into the spilled coffee, the handcuffs, the walk to the door. The retired schoolteacher, Eleanor Voss, had filmed from her table with the steady hands of a woman who had spent 32 years managing chaos in a classroom and knew how to hold a phone still under pressure. And the Ivory Cup security system, 4 HD cameras mounted at the corners of the room, had recorded everything in crisp, unambiguous detail from angles that left no room for alternative interpretation. By noon, all 3 were online. By 3 p.m., the clip of Brandt dropping the badge wallet into the puddle, holding it by 2 fingers, the deliberate contempt of the gesture unmistakable, had been viewed 400,000 times. By evening, it was over 1 million. The cable news cycle began that night and did not stop for 10 days. One network played the clip of Brandt saying, "Honey, I don't know where you got this thing," 43 times in a single broadcast. Another ran a segment titled "The Coffee Shop Arrest" that opened with Eleanor Voss sitting very straight in her living room, saying in the careful voice of a woman who chooses words the way she once chose them for report cards, she was eating a scone. She wasn't doing anything. And she looked at that camera before he touched her like she knew. Like she had been ready for this her whole life. And she was ready again. The Maplewood Police Department's union issued its statement on day 3. Officer Brandt responded appropriately to a reported disturbance and a subject who declined to provide identification in a timely manner consistent with department protocol. We stand fully behind Officer Brandt's conduct and judgment in this matter. The statement was released at 9 a.m. By 9:47, 3 retired federal prosecutors had appeared on separate networks to explain in precise and patient detail exactly how many things in that statement were factually incorrect. Chief Dennis Harlow gave one interview to a television anchor he had known for 11 years on a local station where the questions were unlikely to draw blood. He used the phrase, "a breakdown in communication," 4 times in 6 minutes. He was not challenged on a single one of them. He went home that evening and slept with the particular soundness of a man who believes the difficult part is behind him. Brant stopped checking the news by day 8. The union lawyers had called him twice and told him the same thing both times. The log was airtight. The welfare check framing was solid. The footage, however damaging it looked, showed no crime. The civil case would settle for nuisance money. He just needed to stay quiet and let the process work. He began to believe them. On a Thursday of the second week, he wrote 2 parking tickets and laughed at something a younger officer said in the break room. He went home and watched the game and had a beer and went to bed before 11. The specific dangerous return of something resembling normal. What he did not know, what he had no mechanism for knowing, was that on the afternoon of the arrest itself, Aaliyah had locked up the cafe during her lunch break, driven to the FBI field office on Broad Street in Columbus, and hand-delivered a USB drive containing the complete unedited security footage from all 4 cameras in the Ivory Cup. She had also submitted a 5-page written statement typed the night before on her laptop single-spaced, with timestamps describing everything she had witnessed from behind the counter. She was 23 years old. She had done it without being asked, without a lawyer, without telling anyone. She returned to work, clocked back in 2 minutes before her break ended, and said nothing about it to anyone. Monica Shea opened the formal civil rights investigation into the Maplewood PD on day 12, retroactive to the earliest complaint on Brant's personnel file. She filed the paperwork herself. She did not delegate a word of it. On the same day, Raymond Osei, one of the most accomplished civil rights litigators in the Midwest, whose name alone had a way of making city attorneys check their liability coverage, entered his formal appearance in Caldwell versus City of Maplewood. His office was on the 39th floor of a glass building in Columbus. The conference room where depositions were held had a view of the skyline that had been specifically selected years ago to make the people sitting on the wrong side of the table feel the full weight of what was happening to them. He filed the subpoena for the Maplewood PD's complete dispatch logs on day 14. On the Friday of the 3rd week, Dennis Harlow attended a Chamber of Commerce dinner at the Maplewood Country Club. He shook hands with 4 aldermen, the president of the Suburban Business Association, and a state senator who had already privately distanced himself from the situation. Harlow ordered the salmon. He was finishing his second glass of wine when his phone buzzed on the tablecloth. A calendar notification. Soft, routine. The kind of alert a man sees 100 times a year without his pulse changing. Deposition Caldwell versus City of Maplewood. Tuesday 9 a.m., Osei and Associates, Columbus. He read it, set the phone face down, picked up his wine glass. The log is in discovery, he thought. Osei has already seen it. A welfare check before the stop, clean time-stamped, formatted identically to every other entry surrounding it. Cole can't build a civil rights case on a welfare check. This is paperwork now. This is just paperwork. He finished the salmon. He slept soundly that night. He did not know, could not have known, that Raymond Osei's forensic technology team had completed its analysis of the Maplewood PD's computer-aided dispatch server 48 hours earlier. He did not know what they had found. He would know on Tuesday. In a conference room 39 floors above the Columbus skyline, with a court reporter's fingers poised above her keys and a video camera's red light blinking in the corner, he would know everything on Tuesday. The conference room at Osei and Associates occupied the 39th floor of a glass tower in downtown Columbus. On a clear November morning, it offered an unobstructed view of the city skyline buildings and sky merging at the edge of visibility into a single gray line that communicated without effort the full weight of altitude. It was a room designed with considerable intentionality. The mahogany table was 12 feet long. The chairs on one side were 2 inches lower than the chairs on the other. The difference was barely perceptible and entirely deliberate. Brant and Harlow sat on the lower side. Between them was Joyce Pullman, the city attorney, 54 years old. Heavy-set a woman who had spent her career managing problems that were by definition containable. She had a legal pad, a pen she kept clicking and unclicking in a rhythm that communicated her internal state with complete accuracy, and the faint, pervasive smell of antacids that had been her constant companion for the past 9 days. Across the table, Renee Caldwell and Raymond Osei, a court reporter, sat at the table's head, fingers poised above her stenotype machine. In the corner, a video camera's red light blinked with the patient steadiness of something that does not tire. Osei spent 20 minutes on background. Training history, commendations, disciplinary record. He was unhurried, methodical, building something whose purpose was not yet visible. Brant answered smoothly. 3 weeks of careful reconstruction had reassembled his confidence into something that almost felt like the original. The log was in discovery. Osei had already seen it. A welfare check before the stop. This was paperwork. Officer Brant, Osei said, leaning forward slightly, both hands flat on the table. Let's talk about the morning of October 14th. Why did you enter the Ivory Cup? I was responding to a dispatch call. Report of a black female acting erratically, possible disturbance. Anonymous tip came across my terminal before I turned onto Chestnut. I see. Osei shuffled papers. And you received this call before you entered the cafe. You did not enter based on personal judgment and construct a justification afterward. Correct. I followed protocol. I received a call. I responded to it. Osei asked the same question, twice more, rephrased each time. Brant confirmed it under oath on the record, with the steady jaw and level eyes of a man whose lie had calcified over 3 weeks into something that no longer felt like one. Then to Harlow. Chief Harlow, you have submitted the department's complete dispatch logs as part of discovery. Can you confirm those logs accurately reflect all calls received on the morning of October 14th, that no entries were created, modified, or backdated after the fact? Harlow adjusted his cufflinks. I can confirm that. I personally reviewed and submitted those logs. The call in question predates Officer Brant's stop. Joyce Pullman stopped clicking her pen. The silence lasted 2 seconds. It had a texture, a density, the stillness of air before significant weather. She had been in enough rooms to recognize the feeling. She could not yet name its source. Her hand went still on the legal pad. Osei reached into his briefcase. The motion was unhurried. He removed a USB drive. He also removed a bound document, 47 pages, tabbed, color-coded, and placed both on the table with the deliberate care of a man who has been waiting a long time to set something down. I have here a forensic digital analysis of the Maplewood Police Department's computer-aided dispatch server conducted under federal subpoena. The analysis identifies a log entry created at 10:53 a.m. on October 14th, using Chief Harlow's administrative credentials with a timestamp manually adjusted to 7:58 a.m. He let that settle for 3 full seconds. The room did not breathe, but more relevantly, I have this. He plugged the USB into the laptop in front of him. He turned the volume up. The voices filled the conference room. Dennis Harlow's voice, first clean, unmistakable, completely without distortion. The audio quality of a recording made 8 feet from a state-of-the-art microphone array through 3/8 of an inch of standard interior glass. When her attorney subpoenas the logs, this is what he finds. A welfare check. No jury convicts on that. Then Brant, it looks real. Then Harlow with the flat, decisive certainty of a man who has just crossed a line and chosen not to look back. It is real now. The recording stopped. The silence that followed was not the polite silence of a pause in conversation. It was the silence of a room from which all the oxygen had been removed. The court reporter's fingers had stopped. She was looking at the table. Joyce Pullman pushed her legal pad away from herself, a small, involuntary gesture of dissociation, as if distance from the object might create distance from what was happening around it. Brandt was holding the edge of the conference table with both hands. The color had left his face so completely and so rapidly that the skin around his jaw had taken on a grayish cast under the conference room lighting. His mouth was open by a fraction of an inch. Nothing came out. Harlow stared at Osei's laptop with the expression of a man watching something he trusted completely collapse without warning or sound. His cufflinks caught the light. His hands were very still. Renee had not moved. She had held the same posture for 95 minutes, back straight, hands in her lap, face quiet and watching. She was looking at Harlow with the specific patient attention of a woman who waited 3 weeks for this moment and always knew with complete precision what it would look like when it arrived. Joyce Pullman stood. Her chair scraped back hard. "I need a recess. I need to call the mayor. Right now." "No," Renee said. She stood. She walked around the end of the table, not quickly, not with any performance of drama, but with the same unhurried certainty with which she had moved through every room of her professional life for 24 years. She stopped near the center of the room. The conference room door opened. 4 FBI agents walked in. Suits, not tactical gear. Their faces were not performing anything. Brandt stood so fast his chair hit the credenza behind him. "Qualified immunity, you cannot..." Renee stepped toward him. She stopped 3 feet away. She looked at the man who had dropped her badge into a puddle of coffee and called her honey in front of a cafe full of people. And she said what she had known for 3 weeks she would eventually say. Qualified immunity. Renee said, protects officers from civil liability for good faith errors committed in the performance of their duties. It has never, not once in the entire history of its application, shielded any person from federal criminal prosecution for felonies that are recorded, documented, and proven beyond any reasonable doubt. She held Brandt's eyes without blinking. "You wanted to make an arrest on October 14th, Officer Brandt." Her voice was entirely quiet. "You made one today." "So do we." The agents moved in. Brandt was handcuffed at the conference table on camera. The court reporter's fingers moving again across her keys, capturing every word and sound as the thing came apart. He did not resist physically. He simply stood with his hands behind his back and stared at the surface of the mahogany table, as though he was trying to find something in the grain of the wood that would explain how he had arrived here. Harlow was cuffed without resistance. He had moved past resistance into a stunned, inert stillness that looked like composure from a distance, but was actually the complete absence of any viable alternative. Whatever mechanism he had used to manage his public face for a decade was still operating barely, on the last of whatever had been fueling it, and it produced nothing now except a quality of blankness that was somehow worse than tears. The lead agent placed a printed warrant on the table in front of Joyce Pullman without ceremony. She looked at it. She looked at the 2 handcuffed men being walked toward the conference room door. She looked at Raymond Osei. "The settlement," Osei said, $5.2 million and a federal consent decree granting Bureau of Justice Statistics oversight of the Maplewood Police Department for a minimum of 5 years. You have until 5 o'clock to call the mayor." Pullman's voice, when it came, was barely audible. "I'll draft the check." The federal courthouse was packed to capacity for the sentencing of Kyle Brandt and Dennis Harlow. Reporters filled the press gallery in numbers that the building's clerk had not seen since a political corruption case 4 years earlier. The public gallery was standing at the back. Citizens of Maplewood, Ohio, People who had watched their suburb's name become over 6 weeks of national coverage, a shorthand for something they would have sworn before October 14th could not happen here. Not in Maplewood. Not on Chestnut Street. Not in a cafe where they knew the barista's name. The change in the two men at the defense table was stark enough to constitute its own statement. Brandt had lost 19 pounds in pretrial confinement. His civilian suit, the best one he owned, the one his wife Carla had pressed for his daughter's school recital 2 years ago, and that he had never worn since, was too large at the shoulders. He sat with his hands folded, and his hands were not steady. He had aged in the specific way of a man from whom the structural elements of his identity, the badge, the uniform, the brotherhood, the 9 years of institutional backing had been removed all at once, leaving only what had always been underneath. A man who had peaked early built everything on that peak and spent 15 years refusing to acknowledge the view from it was getting smaller. Harlow sat very still. Not the stillness of composure, the stillness of exhaustion. Judge Carol Nkemdi entered without ceremony. The room rose and fell. She was 63 years old, 19 years on the federal bench, and her reputation in civil rights and public corruption sentencing had been built on one consistent and publicly stated principle. The degree of trust placed in a public official was the precise measure of the offense committed when that trust was broken. She adjusted her glasses. She looked at her papers. Then she looked at the two men at the defense table with the unhurried attention of a woman who has made difficult decisions for 2 decades and has never once confused difficulty with doubt. "Kyle Brandt," she said. Her voice reached the back row without amplification. "You were issued a badge, a uniform, and the sworn authority of the state of Ohio. On the morning of October 14th, you chose to use that authority as an instrument of personal prejudice. You did not stop Special Agent Caldwell because she had done anything wrong. You stopped her because the combination of her race, her bearing, and her presence in a neighborhood you had appointed yourself to gatekeep offended a conviction you have carried by the evidence of your own conduct record for the entirety of your career." Brandt looked at the table. A muscle in his jaw moved. You did not make a mistake in that cafe. The judge's voice had not raised. It had, if anything, dropped the way voices drop when the words no longer require volume to carry weight. A mistake implies a departure from your values. 14 complaints and 9 years of documented conduct demonstrate that you acted in perfect accordance with them. The mistake belonged to every institution that allowed those values to carry a badge for 9 years without consequence. She looked at her papers. Shtikumd. For deprivation of civil rights under color of law and conspiracy to obstruct federal justice, 144 months in federal custody. No possibility of early release. 12 years. His daughter was 13. His son was 10. He would be released if everything proceeded according to federal sentencing guidelines when his daughter was 25. He sat very still and did the arithmetic behind his eyes. The arithmetic was not survivable. "Dennis Harlow," the judge turned to the former chief. "You occupied a position of greater responsibility than the man beside you. You were not blind to who Officer Brandt was. You were his shield for 9 years. You were his shield. And when the consequences of his conduct threatened to reach you, your response was to fabricate federal records, coach your subordinate in the commission of additional felonies, and lie about all of it under oath on camera in front of a court reporter." She paused. "For conspiracy, obstruction of federal justice, and perjury, 180 months in federal custody. No parole. 15 years. Harlow received it without visible reaction. The mechanism was still running, barely. In the second row, Monica Shea sat with a file open in her lap, the next case already. She did not look up when the marshals moved. As Brandt was walked toward the exit, He looked across the courtroom at Renee, seated in the front row, a manila folder open, reading the next thing. He looked at her for a long moment. The aggression was gone. The territorial certainty was gone. The 9 years of institutional armor was gone. What remained was something simpler and considerably worse: the hollow, spent bewilderment of a man who had genuinely never believed at any point in the preceding 6 weeks that this specific outcome was possible for him. He opened his mouth. The marshal's hand closed on his arm. "Move it, inmate." The word landed in the courtroom the way it was designed to land. A reclassification complete and final. The man who had called a federal agent honey in a cafe on Chestnut Street was now a number in a federal system, and the system had no interest in the 9 years he had spent believing himself exempt from it. Renee turned the page in her folder. There was work to do. The Maplewood City Council met in emergency session 3 weeks after sentencing under fluorescent lights and the attention of every property taxpayer in Columbiana County. The city attorney stood at the podium and delivered the news without preamble, because there was no framing that made it land gently. The liability insurer for the city of Maplewood had invoked the willful misconduct exclusion in the department's coverage policy. The fabrication of federal records documented proven, recorded placed the settlement squarely outside the boundaries of what any insurer was contractually obligated to cover: $5.2 million, coming directly from the general fund. The mayor read the resulting budget cuts from a prepared statement with the grim, precise delivery of a man who has written difficult speeches before, but never one quite this expensive. The Chestnut Street Community Center closed effective January 1st. The public library system reduced to 4 operating days per week for a minimum of 3 years. A capital improvement project for the Elm Ridge recreation fields, 2 years in planning, fully designed, already bid out, canceled entirely. And property taxes increased by 3.5% annually for 5 consecutive years. The people in that council chamber, the people who had driven past the same patrol car on the same streets for 9 years, without once asking what it was doing in that particular spot, without once looking at a complaint record, without once inquiring why the same officer kept appearing in the same kinds of incidents, with the same kinds of outcomes, felt for the first time. In the only register that reliably changes minds in a wealthy suburb, the true and total cost of their incuriosity. It cost them specifically $412 per household in the first year alone. Renee did not keep the settlement. The transfer paperwork was filed on the same Thursday the mayor made his announcement. Every dollar, the full $5.2 million, was transferred to the newly established Maplewood Civil Liberties Defense Fund, a nonprofit organization incorporated under the laws of the state of Ohio and structured on Raymond Osei's advice with the specific intention of permanence. 6 full-time civil rights attorneys. A forensic technology review team with the capability to analyze any use of force incident in Columbiana County within 72 hours. Annual independent audits of every department in the county published publicly without redaction. The endowment was structured to generate operating income from interest in perpetuity. It would not need to fundraise. It would not depend on political goodwill. It would not require a sympathetic city council or a favorable election cycle. It would simply be there, every year, for as long as anyone needed it. The organization's offices occupied a Victorian storefront on Chestnut Street, 2 doors down from the Ivory Cup, empty for 18 months, freshly painted, the windows clean for the first time in years. Above the entrance, mounted in large bronze letters to the stone facade, the Brant Harlow Center for Civil Rights and Equal Justice. Every officer in the Maplewood Police Department drove past that building on the way to the station. Every new recruit learned the names in their first week of orientation, not as a cautionary tale delivered in a classroom, but as letters in bronze above a door on the street. where it all began visible every morning in every season for as long as the building stood. Renee had not named it after them as cruelty. She understood precisely how it would feel to drive past it every morning. She was not sorry for that. She had named it as architecture, permanent, public, unavoidable. A monument built from their own money, bearing their own names, serving the exact people they had tried to harm, standing on the street where they had made the decision that built it. Some lessons, she believed, needed a physical address. Eleanor Voss became the center's first volunteer intake coordinator. She was at her desk every Tuesday and Thursday morning by 8 o'clock, a yellow legal pad, a cup of coffee from the ivory cup 2 doors down, and the careful, practiced patience of a woman who had spent 32 years believing that people given the right support and the right advocate were capable of more than anyone had told them. On the morning the center opened, Renee stopped at the ivory cup. She ordered black coffee, dark roast, and a blueberry scone. She took the corner table, the same one. The chair sat at the same angle. The Edison bulb above cast the same warm light against the same exposed brick wall. She crossed her legs, settled her hands in her lap, and took the first sip. Outside on Chestnut Street, Aaliyah was unlocking the front door of the center 2 storefronts down. She had a set of keys in her right hand and a stack of intake forms under her left arm. She was wearing her coat against the November morning and moving with the quiet purpose of someone who knows exactly where she is going and why. She looked up through the cafe window, saw Renee at the corner table. She gave her a nod, small, unhurried, serious. The kind of nod that does not require elaboration. The kind that means, I see you. I saw you then. I am still here. Renee returned it with the same weight. Nobody in the ivory cup stared. Nobody's conversation stuttered. The espresso machine completed its cycle. The music played at its low, careful volume. The morning moved through the window in the ordinary way of mornings that do not know they are being watched. Renee picked up her phone. She opened her messages and typed 6 words to her daughter Maya. It held baby. It always holds. Maya's reply took 11 seconds. I knew it would. Love you, Mom. Renee set the phone face down on the table. She picked up her scone. She looked out at Chestnut Street at the bronze letters catching the November light 2 doors down, at Aaliyah moving through the center's entrance with her stack of forms, at Eleanor Voss's silhouette visible through the front window, already at her desk, already reading. She thought about nothing in particular, the way a woman thinks about nothing when every decision that mattered has already been made well. And the work, the steady, necessary, unglamorous, essential work, simply continues.
I have told a lot of stories on this channel. I thought I had built up a professional distance from them by now. This one broke through that distance completely, because Renee Caldwell didn't do anything extraordinary. She ordered coffee. She sat down. She waited for a meeting. And for that, for the simple, unremarkable act of existing in a space while black, she was handcuffed in front of a room full of witnesses by a man who had done it before, 14 times before, and had never once been made to answer for it. What stays with me isn't the recording, it isn't the sentencing, it's Maya, 16 years old, driving through suburbs like Maplewood 3 times a week, and a mother who had already had the conversation with her, not because she wanted to, because she had no choice. That's what this story is really about. If it hit you the way it hit me, drop your city and the time you're watching in the comments. I read everyone. And if you're not subscribed yet, I hope this was the story that changes that. More are coming. I'll see you in the next one.